The first window shattered before Hannah Carter realized the screaming wasn't coming through her headphones. It was coming from the hallway. Glass exploded across the floor of Studio 3 as the red on-air sign continued glowing above the soundproof booth. Her heartbeat stumbled. For one impossible second, she thought it was part of the city outside a car accident, maybe. Then, every monitor in the control room went black. The emergency lights flickered on. Someone pounded against the locked studio door. "Hannah!" her producer shouted from the other side. "Don't open it!" Another crash echoed through the station. Heavy footsteps. Shouting. Not panic. Comment? Professional. Controlled. She looked through the studio window just in time to see men in black tactical suits flooding the newsroom. They moved with terrifying precision, communicating through earpieces while sweeping every corridor with rifles lowered but ready. They weren't police. Police never moved like that. Her microphone was still live. Thousands of listeners were still connected. She swallowed hard. "This is Hannah Carter," she whispered into the microphone, struggling to keep her voice steady. "It looks like we have some kind of emergency here tonight." A gunshot echoed somewhere down the hall. Then silence. Absolute silence. Even the city beyond the rain-covered windows seemed to stop breathing. Her headphones crackled. A calm male voice replaced the usual control room feed. "Continue reading the letter." Hannah froze. "Who is this?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, it repeated the same sentence. "Continue reading the letter." She slowly looked down. The latest anonymous letter still rested on the desk in front of her. Cream-colored paper. Black fountain pen ink. No signature. Just like every other letter that had arrived during the past 3 years. Every Thursday. Always before midnight. Always delivered by hand. No fingerprints. No return address. No explanation. Only stories. Stories about a man who loved a woman he could never deserve. A man haunted by promises written in blood. A man who never once asked forgiveness. Her listeners called him the Midnight Writer. Nobody knew his identity. Not even Hannah. She had built half her audience around those letters. She unfolded the final page. Rain hammered against the station windows. The mysterious voice remained inside her headphones. Waiting. Watching. She cleared her throat. "There are names that should never be spoken," she read softly, "because once they're heard, people die." Outside the booth, the armed men stopped moving. Every one of them turned toward the studio. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. She continued. "If someday someone accidentally says my real name." She hesitated. The next line looked strange, almost invisible, as though written beneath another layer of ink. She leaned closer. "Tell her to run." There was one final word. "A name." She frowned. It looked Italian, old-fashioned. She had never seen it before. Without thinking, she spoke it aloud. "Alessandro Vittori." The reaction was immediate. Every light inside the station went dark. Outside, dozens of black SUVs screeched to a halt, surrounding the building from every direction. Helicopter blades thundered overhead. Her producer screamed. Someone outside yelled, "Move! Move! Move!" The station's front entrance exploded inward. Not from gunfire, from explosives. Hannah stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. "What is happening?" Nobody answered. The studio door slowly opened. Not kicked in. Opened. A tall man stepped through the smoke. Black tailored overcoat. Dark charcoal suit. Rain glistened across his shoulders. His face remained unreadable. Late 30s, perhaps. Powerful without appearing muscular. Elegant without trying. The kind of man whose silence filled an entire room. His gray eyes settled on Hannah. Not with anger. Recognition. Something almost painful flickered across his expression before disappearing beneath perfect control. He looked at the letter, then at her. "You said the name." His voice was calm. almost gentle. I didn't know. I know. He glanced toward the shattered hallway. We're out of time. She backed away. Who are you? Instead of answering, he walked to the desk and picked up the letter with surprising care, as though it were priceless. His fingers lingered against the paper. You were never supposed to receive this one. You wrote these? Silence. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Outside, automatic gunfire erupted. Not from his men. Someone else had arrived. One of the bodyguards rushed to the doorway. Boss. Only one word, but it changed everything. Boss. Hannah suddenly understood why every armed man in the building obeyed him without question, why nobody raised their voice, why the air itself seemed afraid of him. The stories she'd heard about Chicago's invisible king flooded back into her memory, the man whose face almost never appeared in photographs, the one federal agencies had chased for years without proving a single crime, the ghost who supposedly controlled half the city's underground economy. No, it couldn't be. He looked back at her. You have exactly 20 seconds to decide. Decide what? Whether you leave with me. Another explosion shook the building. Or die with everyone else. Before she could answer, bullets ripped through the studio windows. The man crossed the room faster than she thought possible. One powerful arm wrapped around her shoulders. He pulled her down just as shattered glass rained over them. His body shielded hers completely. She felt the impact of fragments striking his coat. He didn't flinch, didn't even look behind him. More gunfire. His men returned fire from the hallway. The sound echoed through every floor of the building. Hannah couldn't breathe. She had never been this close to him. He smelled faintly of cedarwood, expensive cologne, and rain. His heartbeat remained impossibly steady. You should be terrified, she whispered. I am. She looked up. You don't seem afraid. I'm afraid, he said quietly, of being 30 seconds too late. The words made no sense. Why would a man like him fear being late for a complete stranger? He released her only after the shooting stopped. Can you walk? 2. Yes. Good. She didn't move. I'm not going anywhere until you explain who you are. For the first time, irritation crossed his face. Not because she questioned him, because time was running out. My name isn't important. It apparently is. His gaze hardened. You already know too much. Before Hannah could respond, another voice echoed from the corridor. They're inside. The Mafia Boss closed his eyes for half a second, almost as though he had expected this. Then he reached into his coat. Hannah's muscles tensed. Instead of a weapon, he removed a silver fountain pen. Old. Scratched. Beautiful. He placed it gently beside the anonymous letters. You've been looking for the author. She stared at the pen. Her pulse quickened. This belonged to him. You mean? Yes. He looked directly into her eyes. I wrote every letter. Her mind went blank. 3 years. Hundreds of letters. The lonely confessions. The guilt. The heartbreak. The impossible love story. Every word had come from the most feared man in Chicago. But before she could ask another question, every bodyguard in the hallway suddenly raised their weapons toward the lobby. Not because the enemy had entered, because someone else had. One elderly woman stepped through the smoke, holding nothing except a faded photograph. The moment the Mafia Boss saw her, every trace of emotion vanished from his face. The woman lifted the photograph high enough for Hannah to see. It showed a smiling young woman standing beside a much younger version of the Mafia Boss. And the woman in the photograph looked exactly like Hannah. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The elderly woman stood in the middle of the smoke-filled lobby, clutching the faded photograph with trembling fingers. Her silver hair was soaked by the rain blowing through the shattered entrance, yet her eyes never left the Mafia Boss. Neither did his. Every armed man lowered his weapon without being told. The silence felt heavier than the gunfire. Hannah looked at the photograph again. The resemblance wasn't just striking. It was impossible. The young woman smiled with the same warm hazel eyes, the same soft cheekbones, the same crooked smile Hannah had spent 29 years seeing in the mirror. She looked like Hannah, 25 years older. The elderly woman whispered only 4 words. "She's still alive." The Mafia boss closed his eyes. For the first time since entering the station, he looked shaken, not frightened, broken. Before Hannah could demand an explanation, another explosion erupted from the rear parking lot. Flames reflected across the studio windows. One of the bodyguards pressed a hand to his earpiece. "Boss, more vehicles. East entrance." The Mafia boss opened his eyes again. The vulnerability vanished. His expression became stone. "They found us." He turned toward Hannah. "You have to leave. I'm not leaving until someone tells me who that woman is." "No. She has my face. I know." "You know?" His jaw tightened. "I know more than I can tell you tonight." She stepped closer instead of backing away. "You've been sending me letters for 3 years." "Yes." "You knew my name." "Yes." "You knew where I worked." "Yes." "You watched my show every night." A pause. "Then, every single night." His honesty unsettled her more than another lie ever could. "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he removed a small wireless earpiece from his pocket and handed it to one of his men. "Take the northern route. Make them believe she's with Convoy 2. The bodyguard nodded once. Within seconds, 6 black SUVs accelerated away from the station in different directions. Decoys. He was already preparing for another attack. Hannah folded her arms. "I'm not getting into one of your cars." "You are." "I barely know who you are." His eyes met hers. "That's exactly why you're in danger." Sirens echoed somewhere beyond the rain. Not police. Ambulance. Fire crews. The city was waking to chaos. The Mafia boss extended his hand. Not demanding. Waiting. "You have 30 seconds before every camera in Chicago arrives here." She looked at his hand. Strong. Steady. A hand that had probably signed death warrants. Yet, it remained open, offering safety or captivity. She couldn't tell which. "I don't trust you. I wouldn't expect you to. Then why should I come?" His answer came quietly. "Because everyone else who knows my real name dies." 5 minutes later, Hannah sat inside the back seat of a midnight black Rolls-Royce. Rain streamed across the tinted windows. The city blurred into streaks of gold and crimson. She watched the convoy weave through empty Chicago streets with impossible precision. Every intersection had already been secured. Traffic lights changed before they arrived. Roads emptied seconds ahead of them. This wasn't simply power. It was control. The Mafia boss sat across from her without speaking. A crystal divider separated them from the driver. Silence filled the cabin. Not awkward, heavy. She finally broke it. "So," he looked up. "Do you have a name?" A faint smile almost appeared. "Almost. Several. I'd like the real one." "You already said it. Alessandro Vittori." He looked out the window. "I haven't heard anyone speak that name in 18 years. You could have denied it. I've spent my entire life denying it." His answer lingered between them. Hannah studied him more carefully now. He wasn't what she expected. There were no tattoos crawling up his neck, no flashy jewelry, no arrogance, only expensive simplicity. Everything about him whispered quiet authority instead of loud wealth. Even his watch was understated. The dangerous men never needed to prove they were dangerous. "You don't look like someone who writes love letters." "I don't. I've read hundreds. They weren't love letters." She frowned. "What were they?" He answered, without hesitation. "Confessions." The convoy entered an underground tunnel hidden beneath an abandoned warehouse near the Chicago River. Massive steel gates opened automatically. Security cameras followed every movement. The elevator inside wasn't industrial. It belonged in a 5-star hotel. Italian marble, soft jazz, fresh orchids. The contrast made Hannah uneasy. Luxury built beneath a fortress. The elevator descended. 10 floors, 15, 20. The doors opened into a breathtaking underground penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked an illuminated subterranean lake. Ancient stone walls blended with modern architecture. A fireplace stretched nearly 20 feet across one wall. Everything smelled of cedarwood and old books. It didn't feel like a criminal hideout. It felt lonely. The Mafia Boss removed his coat and draped it across a chair. "You'll stay here tonight. I'm not your prisoner." "No." "Then I can leave?" "If you leave before sunrise." He looked directly into her eyes. "You won't survive the night." She hated how believable he sounded. "I'm calling the FBI. They already know you're missing." "My family? They're under protection." "You contacted them." "I contacted people who contacted them." "You're unbelievable." "I've been called worse." She laughed once, not because anything was funny, because the absurdity had become unbearable. "You expect me to believe all of this?" "No." "Then what do you expect?" His voice softened. "I expect you to stay alive long enough to hate me later." Hours passed. Neither of them slept. Hannah wandered through the enormous library, while armed guards silently patrolled outside every entrance. Thousands of books lined the shelves. History, art, philosophy, classical literature. Nothing about the room matched the image of Chicago's most feared mafia boss. She stopped before an antique radio displayed inside a glass case. Beside it rested dozens of neatly tied envelopes. Her breath caught. The handwriting. She recognized it instantly. The anonymous letters, not copies. Original drafts, hundreds of them. Each dated, each carefully preserved. She reached for one. "You shouldn't." His voice came from behind her. She turned. He stood several feet away, hands in his pockets. Not threatening. Watching. "You kept every draft. I never intended anyone to see them. Then why save them?" "Because they were the only conversations I could have." "With the woman you loved?" Silence. She expected him to walk away. Instead, he nodded once. "I failed her. You blame yourself. I buried her." The words landed like stones. "You buried. I believed she was dead." "You said believed. I was wrong." He looked toward the rain cascading beyond the underground glass. Sometimes surviving is crueler than dying. Hannah hesitated. Something inside her shifted. Not trust. Understanding. Very different things. "You still love her." "I never stopped." "Even after all these years?" His answer came almost inaudibly. "There are promises time doesn't erase." She lowered her eyes to the letters again. Every page suddenly felt different. Not mysterious. Heartbreaking. Before she could ask another question, a soft chime echoed through the penthouse. Every guard instantly stiffened. One bodyguard hurried inside. His face had gone pale. "Boss." "What?" "We found the recording." Alessandro's expression darkened. "What recording?" "The live broadcast." "So?" The bodyguard swallowed. It wasn't only transmitted across Chicago. Pause. Then the words that froze everyone in the room. It was intercepted by every major mafia family on the East Coast. Silence. The bodyguard continued. "They all heard Miss Carter say your real name." No one spoke. Not even Hannah. Alessandro slowly closed his eyes. For the first time that night, fear crossed his face. Real fear. When he opened them again, he wasn't looking at his men. He was looking only at Hannah. His voice was almost a whisper. "They're not coming for me." Hannah felt cold spread through her entire body. "They're coming." His gaze never left hers. "Because they finally know who you are." Hannah did not sleep. Not because the underground penthouse was uncomfortable. It was too comfortable, too quiet, too protected. That was what made it terrifying. Every window was reinforced glass. Every hallway had armed men standing in silence. Every elevator required a handprint, a code, and the kind of permission ordinary people never even knew existed. She sat on the edge of a leather sofa with one of Alessandro Vittori's letters in her hands, reading the same sentence again and again. If she ever hears my name, burn everything before they find her. Here. Not me. Here. Hannah looked across the library. Alessandro stood near the fireplace, speaking quietly to 3 men in dark suits. His voice never rose. His face never changed. But the room reacted to him like weather. Every man leaned closer when he spoke. Every order landed like law. He was calm. Too calm for a man who had just learned every major mafia family on the East Coast had heard his real name. Too calm for a man who had pulled a radio host out of a shooting and brought her into a hidden fortress beneath Chicago. Too calm for a man who had been writing letters to a dead woman for 3 years. Hannah closed the letter. I want answers. The room went still. One of his men turned toward her, as if she had just aimed a gun at their boss. Alessandro lifted one hand, barely an inch. The man looked away. Hannah stood. I'm done being moved around like luggage. You brought me here. You said people are coming for me. You said they know who I am. So tell me who I am. Alessandro studied her for a long moment. Then he dismissed everyone with a glance. The men left without question. The heavy doors closed. The fire cracked softly between them. You are Hannah Carter, he said. No. Her voice trembled, but she refused to lower it. That's the name on my driver's license. That's the name my aunt raised me with. But that woman at the station had a photograph of someone who looked exactly like me, and you looked at it like you were seeing a ghost. His jaw tightened. Because I was. Who was she? His eyes shifted to the letter in her hand. Her name was Elena Moretti. Hannah felt the name move through the room, like a secret finally breathing. Elena was the daughter of a Sicilian family that should have ruled half the city. She was brilliant, reckless, too kind for the world she was born into. You loved her. Alessandro did not answer quickly. That was answer enough. I was 22 when I met her, he said. I had already done things men spend their whole lives trying to forget. She looked at me like I was still human. Hannah swallowed. And she died? I saw her car burn. The words were flat, but his eyes were not. I buried what was left of her. I killed the men responsible. I made peace with no one. And I never spoke my birth name again. Why? Because Alessandro Vittori died with her that night. Hannah looked down at the letter, and the man everyone fears now, his expression hardened. He was what survived. For a moment, Hannah forgot to be afraid. There was grief in him, buried so deep it had turned into violence. Then the elevator doors opened. A younger man entered quickly, holding a tablet. He had sharp eyes, a cut across his cheek, and the restless energy of someone who had not slept in days. Boss, he said, we found the source of the leak. Alessandro turned. Speak. The broadcast wasn't just intercepted. It was boosted. Hannah frowned. Boosted. The man glanced at her. Then, back at Alessandro. Someone inside the station rerouted the live feed through an offshore server. They wanted the name heard. The room chilled. Hannah shook her head. That's impossible. Nobody at the station even knew what I was going to read. Alessandro looked at her. Who handled the letters before you? My producer. Sometimes the mailroom. Sometimes... She stopped. Her mind returned to the hallway. Her producer screaming through the door. Hannah, don't open it. Not run. Not hide. Don't open it. As if he knew someone was coming through. Alessandro saw the realization on her face. Name, Evan Reed. The younger man typed quickly. Already checking. Hannah's chest tightened. Evan has worked with me for 6 years. Betrayal usually comes from people close enough to be trusted. She glared at Alessandro. You say that like it's normal. In my world, it is. Well, I'm not in your world. He stepped closer. No, Hannah. Last night, my name pulled you into it. The way he said her name made her pulse shift. Not soft, not romantic. Possessive in a way that felt like a warning. She hated that part of her felt safer when he said it. The tablet chimed. The younger man's face changed. Boss. Alessandro didn't look away from Hannah. What? Evan Reed is missing. Hannah's breath caught. And his apartment? Cleaned out. But we found payment records routed through a shell company tied to the Valenti family. Alessandro's eyes went cold. The temperature of the entire room seemed to drop. Hannah had heard that name before. Not on the news. In the letters. The Valentis were not described directly, but there had been fragments. A family that smiled in churches and buried children beneath vineyards. A bloodline Alessandro promised he would never forgive. What does that mean? Hannah asked. It means the family that killed Elena just found a reason to come back to Chicago. And they want me because I said your name? No. Alessandro moved toward the window, staring at the black water beyond the glass. They want you because Elena may have left something behind. Hannah's fingers went numb. What kind of something? He turned back, his gaze lowered to her face, with a strange restraint, as if looking at her hurt him. A child. The word struck harder than gunfire. Hannah almost laughed, because it was too absurd, too dramatic, too impossible. No. Alessandro said nothing. No, she repeated. My parents died when I was a baby. I was raised by my aunt. I have birth certificates. I have photos. Documents can be forged. My aunt wouldn't lie to me. Maybe she was paid to protect you. Hannah crossed the room and slapped him. The sound cracked through the library. The younger man reached for his weapon. Alessandro lifted his hand. Again. Everyone stopped. He slowly turned his face back toward her. There was a faint red mark across his cheek. He did not look angry. That frightened her more. You don't get to walk into my life, Hannah said, voice shaking. Drag me away from everything I know. Tell me my mother might be some dead mafia woman, and then stand there like I should thank you. I don't want your gratitude. What do you want? For the first time, Alessandro had no answer. His eyes held hers. Too long, too intensely. Then he said, I want the truth. The room went silent. Before Hannah could respond, the penthouse alarm changed from soft blue to deep red. Every light along the floor began flashing. A voice came through the speakers. Perimeter breach. Harbor entrance. Alessandro turned sharply. The younger man cursed under his breath. That entrance isn't on any map. Alessandro's face became unreadable again. It is if someone who built this place gave it to them. Hannah backed toward the sofa. What's happening? He crossed to her in 3 steps and took her wrist. Not painfully, firmly. We're leaving. I'm not going anywhere with you until... A bullet punched through the reinforced glass. The window didn't shatter, but the sound made Hannah flinch backward. Alessandro pulled her behind him instantly. Another bullet struck, then another. Tiny white cracks spread across the glass like ice. His men flooded into the room. Snipers across the water. Alessandro's hand moved to the back of Hannah's head, pressing her down behind the marble bar. His body covered hers as more shots hammered the glass. Stay low. She looked up at him, breathless. You said this place was safe. It was. The cracks widened. Somewhere below, an explosion shook the foundation. The underground lake flashed orange. Alessandro looked at one of his guards. Take the east tunnel. The guard hesitated. Boss, if we split, now. The man obeyed. Hannah grabbed Alessandro's sleeve. My aunt. His eyes snapped to hers. What? If they think I'm Elena's child, they'll go after the woman who raised me. For one brief second, something dangerous broke through his control. Not panic, rage. He turned to the younger man. Where is Rose Carter? The man checked the tablet. Safe house on the north side. Send 6 more cars. Already did. Alessandro leaned closer to Hannah. She's protected. You promise? His gaze locked onto hers. I do not make promises lightly. Another explosion erupted. This time, the glass finally gave way. Water, smoke, and freezing air blasted into the penthouse. Hannah screamed as the ceiling lights burst above them. Alessandro wrapped both arms around her and dragged her through a hidden door behind the bookcase. The passage was narrow, dark, concrete. Emergency lights glowed red along the floor. Behind them, gunfire tore through the library. They ran. Hannah's bare feet slipped against the cold floor. Alessandro noticed instantly. Without slowing, he lifted her into his arms. She gasped. I can walk. You're bleeding. She looked down. A shard of glass had cut her foot. She hadn't even felt it. He carried her through the tunnel, as if she weighed nothing. His suit was soaked. Blood ran from a cut near his temple. His jaw was clenched with controlled fury. For the first time, Hannah saw the violence everyone feared. But it was not directed at her. It was wrapped around her like armor. They reached a steel door. Alessandro pressed his palm against the scanner. Nothing happened. He tried again. Red light. Access denied. His eyes narrowed. The younger man arrived behind them, breathing hard. Boss. Alessandro looked at him. The man's face had gone pale. The system locked us out from the inside. Hannah's stomach dropped. A speaker crackled above the door. Then Evan Reed's voice filled the tunnel. Hannah, I'm sorry. She went still. Alessandro slowly lowered her to the ground but kept one arm in front of her. Evan continued, voice trembling. They told me they'd kill my daughter if I didn't help them. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. Evan? A camera above the door clicked on. The red light blinked. Evan's voice broke. They don't want Alessandro. A pause. Then the sentence that made even the Mafia Boss go silent. They want the girl Elena. Died hiding. The steel door unlocked, but it did not open outward. It opened from the other side, and standing beyond it was a man in a white suit, smiling calmly with a gun pointed straight at Hannah's heart. The man in the white suit smiled, as though he had been welcoming honored guests instead of cornering them with a pistol. His silver tie remained perfectly straight, despite the chaos echoing through the tunnels behind him. He couldn't have been older than 40. Elegant, refined, completely at ease. That made him infinitely more dangerous. Good evening, Alessandro. His voice carried effortless confidence. It's been a long time. Alessandro stepped half a pace forward, forcing Hannah behind his shoulder. You should have stayed in New York, Lorenzo. So should your secrets. The name meant nothing to Hannah. The hatred between the two men meant everything. Lorenzo lowered the pistol only slightly, as though firing it were merely one option among many. You've made this far more expensive than it needed to be. You murdered 30 of your own men to reach this tunnel. They were employees. They were family. Lorenzo laughed. That's always been the difference between us. Hannah watched Alessandro's right hand drift almost lazily toward his coat, not reaching for a weapon. Waiting, calculating. Every movement measured to the fraction of a second. Lorenzo noticed it too. I wouldn't. I know. You've always been faster. I know. But not fast enough to stop 3 snipers. Hannah felt Alessandro's body tenser. 3 tiny red laser dots appeared on the concrete wall behind them. Not on Alessandro. Not on his guards. On Hannah. Her pulse stopped. They're aiming at me. They're reminding him who matters now. Lorenzo smiled. You see, Hannah, we've spent 18 years hunting a ghost. Then you said one name on live radio, and suddenly every unanswered question found its way back to Chicago. I don't know what you're talking about. I believe you. He truly sounded as though he did, which is why I'd rather have a conversation than a funeral. Alessandro spoke quietly. You don't get either. Lorenzo sicht. I suppose not. Without warning, the lights vanished. The tunnel dropped into darkness. A single gunshot exploded through the corridor. Then another. Then absolute chaos. Someone grabbed Hannah's wrist. Strong fingers. Varm. Alessandro. Run. I can't see. You don't need to. He pulled her through the darkness, while gunfire ricocheted against concrete walls. She heard men shouting in Italian. Someone screamed. A body crashed into the floor. Another explosion sent dust raining from the ceiling. Emergency lights finally flickered back to life. Lorenzo's men were already advancing through the tunnel. Alessandro fired only twice. Both shots found their targets. He never looked to see whether they fell. He already knew. Left! One of his guards shouted. A steel maintenance door burst open. The remaining guards formed a wall around Hannah, while Alessandro stayed at the rear, covering every step of their retreat. She glanced back. He wasn't escaping. He was making sure no bullet reached her. One attacker broke through the smoke, carrying an assault rifle. Alessandro moved first. He intercepted the man before the rifle could rise. One brutal strike. The weapon clattered across the floor. A second movement. The attacker collapsed without another sound. There was no anger in Alessandro's face, only terrifying efficiency. He looked less like a man fighting, and more like someone performing a task he had repeated 1,000 times. The group reached another reinforced corridor. This one sloped upward. Cold air drifted inside. An exit. Halfway there, Hannah noticed something lying on the ground. A photograph. She almost stepped over it before recognizing the face. Her own. Not recent. She looked no older than 5. She stopped. Alessandro immediately turned. What is it? She picked up the picture with trembling hands. A little girl stood beside a woman whose face had been deliberately burned away. Only the child's face remained untouched. Written across the back in faded ink were 7 words. If she survives, never tell Alessandro. Hannah's breathing became uneven. This was here on purpose. Alessandro stared at the photograph longer than he should have. Someone had left it for him to find. Lorenzo. Another message. Another wound. We're moving, Alessandro ordered. No. Hannah refused to take another step. I want the truth. This isn't the place. It's never the place. Gunfire echoed again behind them. She didn't move. You owe me more than fragments. For several seconds, Alessandro said nothing. Then he stepped close enough that only she could hear him. I met Elena when I had nothing except enemies. His voice was lower than she'd ever heard. She taught me what mercy looked like. His eyes drifted to the photograph. The night she disappeared. She told me she had one final secret. What secret? I never found out. Because she died. Because I believed she died. The distinction struck Hannah harder than before. Not certainty. Belief. A lifetime built upon the wrong grave. Another guard approached at a run. Boss. Vehicles are waiting. Alessandro nodded. They emerged through a concealed exit beneath an abandoned freight terminal near Lake Michigan. Rain poured relentlessly across the empty docks. A line of armored SUVs waited with engines running. The moment Hannah stepped outside, a flash exploded from somewhere across the harbor. A camera. Someone had photographed them. Another flash. Then another. Journalists. Dozens of them. How had they arrived so quickly? Lorenzo. He hadn't merely attacked. He had staged a public spectacle. Within seconds, helicopters circled overhead. Reporters shouted questions from behind police barricades. There she is. Who's the woman? Is that Vittori? Did the Mafia Boss kidnap the radio host? Cameras captured everything. Alessandro opened the SUV door for Hannah. She hesitated. If I get in, you become tomorrow's headline. And if I don't, you become tomorrow's obituary. The answer left no room for pride. She climbed inside. The convoy accelerated into the storm. For 20 silent minutes, neither of them spoke. The television mounted inside the vehicle suddenly switched on automatically. Every news station carried the same breaking story. A blurred image filled the screen. Hannah, standing beside Alessandro, his arm around her while shielding her from gunfire. The headline beneath it read, "Chicago Mafia King escapes with mystery woman after deadly radio station attack." Another channel displayed an older photograph. Hannah froze. It wasn't her. It was the woman from the faded picture, Elena. The resemblance was undeniable. The anchor continued. Anonymous sources now claim the unidentified woman may be connected to the disappearance of Elena Moretti, whose death nearly 2 decades ago triggered one of the bloodiest mafia wars in American history. The broadcast abruptly changed. The newsroom disappeared. A black screen replaced it. Then, a single man appeared. Lorenzo. He looked directly into the camera. "If Alessandro Vittori wants peace," he smiled, "return my daughter." Hannah looked at Alessandro in disbelief. His daughter? Alessandro's face remained unreadable. "No." Then, who is he talking about? Alessandro slowly turned toward her. His voice was barely audible. The child, Elena, disappeared to protect. He stopped. For the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely uncertain. "May never have been mine." Before Hannah could process the words, every phone inside the convoy began ringing at exactly the same moment. One of the guards answered. His expression drained of color. He looked toward Alessandro. "Boss, what happened?" The guard swallowed. They breached the North Side safe house. Hannah's heart pounded. "My aunt?" The guard closed his eyes for a second. "They took Rose Carter alive." Silence consumed the vehicle. Then Alessandro reached into his pocket and removed the silver fountain pen, the same pen he had left beside the letters of the radio station. He stared at it for only a moment before speaking with frightening calm. "Tell every captain in Chicago." The guards waited. His next words carried the weight of a declaration of war. "Burn every Valenti property before sunrise." The convoy disappeared into the rain as the skyline behind them began lighting up with distant columns of fire. Chicago did not wake up the next morning. It braced for war. Before sunrise, smoke rose from warehouses, private docks, casinos, and abandoned factories that had belonged to the Valenti family for generations. Explosions echoed across the city like distant thunder, while every major news station abandoned regular programming to cover the violence spreading through the streets. No one officially named the men responsible. They didn't have to. Everyone understood the message. Alessandro Vittori had stopped hiding. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the invisible king of Chicago had declared open war. Hannah stood inside the underground command room beneath the penthouse, surrounded by walls covered in digital maps, security feeds, and flashing red markers that multiplied by the minute. The room looked less like a criminal headquarters than a military operations center. Men moved silently between stations. Encrypted radios crackled without pause. Every few seconds, another location disappeared from the map. Another safe house compromised. Another convoy attacked. Another captain requesting orders. Alessandro stood at the center of it all, perfectly still. His hands rested behind his back, while everyone around him raced against time. He listened. He decided. He never raised his voice. That frightened Hannah more than anger ever could. A young lieutenant approached him. "Boss." Alessandro didn't turn. "Speak. We've confirmed Rose Carter is alive." Hannah's heart leaped. "Where?" The lieutenant hesitated. "An abandoned church outside Joliet." Alessandro's expression remained unreadable. "That's too easy. You think it's a trap? I know Lorenzo." He finally looked toward Hannah. "He wants us to come. Then we go." "No." She frowned. "No? You stay here. My aunt is there. And Lorenzo knows that. I'm still going." His eyes hardened. I said no. For the first time since meeting him, Hannah walked directly into his personal space. So close she could see the tiny scar beneath his left eye. You don't get to decide that. I decide everything that keeps you alive. I'm not one of your soldiers. No. His voice softened. You're the only person I cannot afford to lose. The words escaped before he could stop them. Silence settled across the room. Several guards looked away, pretending not to hear. Alessandro seemed almost irritated with himself. Hannah searched his face. There it was. Not obsession. Not possession. Fear. Real fear. She had seen powerful men become angry. She had never seen one terrified. Not for himself. For here. Before either of them spoke again, every monitor suddenly went black. One screen flickered back to life. A live video appeared. Rose Carter sat, tied to a wooden chair, inside an old stone church. She looked exhausted but unharmed. Standing beside her was Lorenzo. He smiled directly into the camera. "Good morning, Alessandro." No one in the room moved. Lorenzo continued calmly. "You've burned 43 of my properties." A slight pause. "I expected 45. He sighed dramatically. "You're becoming sentimental." Alessandro remained silent. "I have your aunt," Lorenzo said. "I have your war. And I have something you've been searching for since the night Elena disappeared." The room became perfectly still. Lorenzo lifted a weathered leather journal into view. Hannah immediately recognized the handwriting from the anonymous letters. Elena's. Alessandro's breathing changed almost imperceptibly. The journal, he had never found it. Lorenzo smiled wider. "Come to St. Gabriel's Church." He looked toward the camera. "Come alone." The screen went black. Exactly 15 minutes later, rain poured across the empty highway leading toward the abandoned countryside church. Against Alessandro's orders, Hannah sat inside the lead armored SUV. He hadn't agreed. She had simply refused to stay behind. Neither of them mentioned it. The convoy drove through sheets of rain beneath a sky the color of steel. No conversation, only silence. Finally, Hannah spoke. "Do you really believe Elena might still have written that journal?" "I know she did." "How?" "Because I gave it to her." She looked toward him. It was blank. "I told her to fill it with every dream we never got to live." His voice remained controlled. "But after the explosion, you thought it burned. I thought everything burned." Hannah lowered her eyes. For years, he'd written letters to a ghost while believing her final words had vanished forever. No wonder he never stopped. The convoy slowed. Ahead, St. Gabriel's Church emerged through the rain. It had once been beautiful. Now, broken stained glass windows stared into the storm like empty eyes. Its bell tower leaned dangerously to one side. Weeds covered forgotten graves. No lights. No movement. Too quiet. Alessandro looked toward his men. "No one enters until I say." Every guard protested immediately. "Boss, that's an order." He stepped from the SUV. Rain soaked his black coat within seconds. Hannah climbed out after him. He turned sharply. "I told you to stay inside, and I told you I'm done hiding. You don't understand what he'll do." "No." She met his eyes. "But I understand what you'll do." He stared at her. "You'll sacrifice yourself before letting anyone touch me." He said nothing, because she was right. A faint smile appeared despite the danger surrounding them. "You finally know me." Before he could answer, the heavy church doors slowly opened by themselves. No one stood there, only darkness. They walked inside together. The air smelled of dust, rain, and old wood. Rows of broken pews stretched toward a cracked altar, illuminated by dozens of candles. Someone had lit every one of them. The golden light danced across shattered stained glass, painting blood-red colors over the stone floor. At the altar sat Rose Carter, still tied, still alive. "Hannah." Her voice trembled. "Don't come any closer." Too late. Steel doors slammed shut behind them. Hidden floodlights exploded to life. More than 30 armed men emerged from balconies, confession booths, and side corridors. They had been waiting the entire time. Lorenzo stepped from behind the altar, carrying Elena's journal. I knew you'd come. Alessandro moved slightly in front of Hannah. Instinct. Always instinct. Lorenzo laughed. Still protecting people who don't belong in your world. They belong less in yours. I disagree. His gaze shifted toward Hannah. I've spent 18 years looking for her. Hannah's pulse quickened. Why? Because your mother stole something from my family. The journal? No. His smile disappeared. You. The single word echoed through the abandoned church. Rose Carter suddenly burst into tears. I'm sorry. Hannah looked toward the woman who had raised her. Aunt Rose? Rose shook her head desperately. I'm not your aunt. The world seemed to stop. I promised Elena I'd never tell you unless they found us. Hannah couldn't breathe. Rose continued through tears. The night, Elena disappeared. She looked at Alessandro. She wasn't running away from you. Alessandro froze. She was running from Lorenzo. Lorenzo applauded slowly. Finally, Rose closed her eyes. Elena begged me to take the baby. Babe, Hannah. I changed every record. More tears. I buried another child's identity. I told the world Elena died. I told Alessandro there was no child. Alessandro stood completely motionless, as though every year of his life had collapsed into this single moment. Rose whispered the sentence she had carried for 28 years. Elena never stopped loving you. Silence filled the church. Then Lorenzo quietly opened the weathered journal. There is only one problem. He removed a folded document hidden between its pages. This journal doesn't belong to Alessandro anymore. He looked directly at Hannah. It belongs to the last living heir of the Moretti family. Hannah's hands trembled. What is it? A will. Lorenzo smiled coldly. The inheritance every Mafia family has been killing for. Before anyone could react, the church bell suddenly rang by itself. Once, twice, 3 times. Alessandro's expression changed instantly. His eyes shot upward toward the old bell tower. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He looked at Hannah. Then, at the ceiling. Without warning, he lunged toward her with everything he had. Hannah. A deafening explosion tore through the ancient church. The bell tower collapsed directly above the altar. The world disappeared beneath stone, fire, and dust. The ancient bell tower crashed through the sanctuary with a roar that swallowed every scream inside St. Gabriel's church. Alessandro tackled Hannah to the ground a split second before massive wooden beams shattered across the altar. Broken, stained glass exploded into the air like a storm of colored knives. Candles rolled across the cracked floor, igniting splintered pews one after another. For several seconds, Hannah couldn't hear anything except the ringing inside her ears. Then she realized Alessandro's weight was still covering her. Alessandro. He didn't answer. She pushed against him with trembling hands until he rolled onto his side. Blood ran down his forehead, staining the collar of his white shirt beneath the ruined black coat. I'm fine, he muttered before she could panic. You are absolutely not fine. I'm alive. You call this alive? A faint smile touched his lips. It'll do. Gunfire erupted again from the opposite side of the church. The collapse had separated Lorenzo from most of his men. Smoke drifted through the broken sanctuary as both sides searched for cover. Rose Carter cried out from beneath a fallen wooden beam. I'm here, Hannah shouted. Ignoring Alessandro's protest, she crawled through broken glass toward the woman who had raised her. Together with one of Alessandro's wounded guards, she managed to lift the beam just enough to pull Rose free. You shouldn't have come, Rose whispered. I couldn't leave you. Rose cupped Hannah's face with shaking hands. I promised your mother I would never let this world take you. Tears blurred Hannah's vision. Then tell me everything. Before Rose could speak, another voice echoed through the burning church. How touching. Lorenzo stepped through the smoke with several remaining gunmen behind him. His immaculate white suit was now streaked with ash, but his smile remained untouched. He held Elena's journal in one hand, a detonator in the other. "One more step," he said calmly, "and this entire church becomes her grave." Everyone froze. Even Alessandro lowered his weapon. Lorenzo looked at Hannah. "You've spent your whole life asking who you are." He slowly opened the journal. The answer isn't in the letters. He removed a folded birth record, protected inside an old leather sleeve. "It's here." He tossed it onto the stone floor. Hannah picked it up carefully. The document was worn with age, but one line remained perfectly clear. "Mother, Elena Moretti." Below it, "Father, Daniel Carter." She frowned. "Daniel Carter?" Rose closed her eyes. He wasn't part of the Mafia. Lorenzo laughed bitterly. "No, that was Elena's greatest betrayal." Rose continued through tears. "Daniel was an investigative journalist. He spent years exposing corruption inside city government." Hannah's heartbeat quickened. "My father was a journalist?" He was the only man brave enough to stand against both corrupt officials and organized crime. Lorenzo's expression darkened. He convinced Elena to disappear. "No," Rose said firmly. "Elena chose to protect her daughter." Lorenzo's voice became colder. "She chose him over the family." Alessandro finally spoke. "She chose innocence." The church fell silent. Alessandro stepped forward. "You've blamed the wrong people for 18 years. Lorenzo's smile faded. "You think this is about revenge?" "It isn't." Lorenzo looked toward the burning ceiling. "My father ordered Elena's death because she refused an arranged marriage that would unite two families." He looked back at Hannah. "When she escaped, every empire built on that alliance began collapsing." "You hunted a child because of that?" Hannah asked. "I hunted the last witness." His words hung heavily in the smoke. Then Alessandro understood. "It wasn't Elena you feared." Lorenzo said nothing. "It was the journal." Alessandro's voice grew sharper. "It contains proof. Your father ordered the murders." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Lorenzo's face. Alessandro continued. "You never wanted the inheritance. You wanted the evidence." Silence answered him. That silence was enough. Hannah looked at the journal again. Loose pages protruded from the back cover. She opened it. Instead of love letters, there were names, dates, bank accounts, judges, politicians, police commanders, every payment, every murder, every order. A complete record of the criminal network that had corrupted the city for decades. Elena hadn't written a diary. She had built insurance. Lorenzo Lunget. "So give it to me." Before he reached her, Alessandro intercepted him. The two men crashed through a broken pew. Neither fired. This wasn't about bullets anymore. It was 18 years of grief, colliding inside one ruined church. Lorenzo fought with desperate fury. Alessandro fought with absolute control. Every strike from Lorenzo came from hatred. Every movement from Alessandro came from purpose. Hannah looked down at the journal, then toward the flames consuming the altar. She finally understood what Elena had tried to protect. Not money, not power, the truth. She turned to Rose. "Can this end?" Rose nodded. "If the truth survives." Hannah stood. She walked directly toward the center of the sanctuary. "Hannah!" Alessandro shouted. Lorenzo saw her first. He broke away from the fight and raised his pistol. "Don't move." She stopped, holding the journal against her chest. "You've spent 18 years trying to bury this." Lorenzo aimed at her heart. "And I'll spend one more second finishing it." Before he could pull the trigger, Hannah threw the journal, not into the fire, toward the shattered, stained glass window behind Alessandro. One of the surviving guards reacted instantly, catching it before it landed outside. Lorenzo fired. The shot echoed through the church. Alessandro moved without thinking. He stepped between them. The bullet struck his shoulder. He staggered but remained standing. Hannah caught him before he fell. "You idiot! I've been called worse." Sirens wailed in the distance. Not one, dozens. Then, hundreds. Rose smiled through her tears. "I sent the files." Hannah looked at her. "When?" "The moment Lorenzo started talking." Rose held up a small satellite phone hidden beneath her sleeve. "Every page has already been transmitted." Lorenzo's face drained of color. "No." The sound of helicopters filled the sky. Searchlights pierced the broken roof. Federal agents flooded the church from every entrance. "Lorenzo Valenti, drop your weapon." He looked around wildly. There was nowhere left to run. He slowly lowered the gun, not because he had surrendered, because he had finally lost. As agents secured the church, Hannah knelt beside Alessandro. Paramedics rushed toward them. He reached weakly into his coat and removed the silver fountain pen. The letters. She smiled through tears. "I know. I never expected anyone to read them. I don't think they were ever meant for me." They weren't. He paused. But somehow, his fingers closed around hers. They found the right person anyway. Months later, Chicago felt different. Trials replaced whispered rumors. Corrupt officials disappeared from office. Families, once ruled by fear, slowly reclaimed their neighborhoods. Alessandro testified against the remaining criminal network, accepting responsibility for his own actions and helping dismantle the empire he had once controlled. The legend of the Invisible King ended, not with another war, but with a choice. One rainy autumn evening, Hannah returned to Studio 3. The shattered windows had been replaced. The red on-air sign glowed once more. She adjusted her headphones and smiled at the microphone. "Good evening, and welcome back." She unfolded a handwritten letter. No anonymous sender. No hidden name. Just elegant handwriting she recognized instantly. She looked through the studio window. Across the street, a man in a dark coat stood beneath an umbrella, not hiding, not watching from the shadows, simply waiting until her show was over. For the first time, she smiled back. Then she began reading. Some stories don't end when the danger is over. They begin when two people decide the truth is worth more than the lives they were given. And perhaps love isn't about finding someone who can save you. It's about finding someone willing to change the ending with you. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Do you believe Hannah made the right choice by protecting the truth instead of protecting the man she loved? And if you enjoy cinematic dark romance filled with mystery, impossible choices, and unforgettable characters, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story is already waiting in the shadows.